Cars. My philosophy on building cars. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I started my racing back in the 70s, early 70s. And, once you get a feel of a real race car on track, man, there's nothing like it. I mean, just being able to, just being so connected to the car, going around the corner, just feeling the G-loads in that car just digging into the asphalt. I mean, that just, I just couldn't get over that. And also back in the 70s, my main business was working on sports cars, typically British sports cars, Italian sports cars, and like the Japanese cars, the 240Z and the Nissan 510. We did made a lot of improvements on them, and I got using European shocks, and I just love the way they drive, because I drive, my pedometer is what tells me if it's a good car or not. So that's the kind of like the background. And for those that haven't been with us for a while, that crusty old toolbox back there, that toolbox has been with me for over 40 years. It's been to, I think, every major racetrack in North America. That's my education. That's, you learn, you do that much time working on cars and racing. You kind of get a lot of things figured out. So between my racing background and my love for driving, more so, and love for how cars feel, you got to have it. And if the car has to drive, I don't care what it looks like on the outside, it's got to drive. And that's how that's the background setting for how I develop my cars. I look at all the things underneath the car that make it work to start with. The suspension, the shocks, the brakes. I have my big philosophy is, before you add a lot of power to your car, you need to build the performance platform, because that's what I do with my cars. Performance platform is chassis, suspension, wheels, tires, brakes. You get those 5 things right, and you're going to have a car that just drives like a dream, and that's why my cars drive so well. The thing is, when it comes to like the suspension, I made not a habit, but I made it a point over the years to study suspension geometry, because back in the mid 70s, we were racing open wheel cars with great engines. We actually started out in racing as an engine builder. We had great engines, but we're getting beat by a couple guys that didn't really even have as good power as we did, but they had better chassis. That's kind of like changed my thinking. Man, maybe we better start doing a little chassis work, do some chassis work, and all of a sudden, boom, we're right there. So that's carried with me all my life. When we did the Celine program in '86, it was supposed to be pure showroom stock, so we really couldn't change much, but I learned a lot that year. We were running just brakes about that big in the front and drum brakes in the back for endurance racing. Imagine doing a couple 24-hour races with teeny little brakes. The easiest way to slow the car down is just get back the bumper of a Corvette and let him slow you down. But what we learned in '86, we carried over through '87. We had much better cars. We upgraded the brakes, the chassis. On '86 cars, we did do the 3-point strut tower brace Atlanta, SC shape, throw it out, it's not part of the production car. '87, part of the production car. So, I mean, what I learned from that, I was really lucky to hook up with a guy from Ford, the Mustang group. He was on suspensions. And in the evenings, he would work with me on different, trying to improve the geometry. And what I ended up doing, Steve, who was just marvelous at getting stuff. One day I got a call that there was a package out at the airport for me. And I went to it wasn't main airport, it's one of the freight things. And here are 3 brand new front K members, not a single hole in them. So I took them back and worked pretty much all night. And in the morning when everybody came back, there were 3 K members that looked like they were stock, but every single hole had been moved a little bit in a lot. And nobody would ever know. And the cars turned so much better after that. So it's kind of like I've been at this for a long time. And after that came, I call that Advanced Geometry Suspension Systems, AGS for short. And that what I learned there carried into AGS-1. And AGS-1 carried into AGS-2. And AGS2 carried into AGS3, which is the SN95, and AGS 3.5, which is the IRS SN95, and AGS4, which is the S197. But each one, I was able to improve the geometry and the chassis. So when I'm building a car, I mean, you gotta have tires on the ground. So look at how are we going to keep all the tires on the ground, get the maximum amount of tire contact. And once I got that, once the geometry's done, then I go back to springs and shocks. With all my background in motorsports and in European cars, I just like the way the European cars ride. The valving they use, the strategy in valving is so much better. So that's some of the only shocks I've been using over the years. You know, back when there weren't a whole lot of choices, it was Off-Coney and Bilstein. Well, now we've got just a plethora of choices for like our later model cars. JRZ is our premium shock, and it's an amazing package. JRZ is a company from Holland, and they custom build the shock. I mean, this is not on the shelf product. We put the order in, they'll custom build a shock for me, package it up, and then ship it next day air. But that's kind of our premium shock, and they're amazing. They come in single adjustable, double adjustable, and double with a canister. Everybody that puts them on raves about them, and I rave about them too. That's our premium. We also have like some H&R packages. We've got like a track package and a street performance. And then we just started something new. We had somebody out Northwest that her budget couldn't really stretch. She got front grip kit, rear grip kit, but her budget really couldn't stretch to get a full shock package. So I came up with a cost-effective compromise. We got some yellow conies and some H&R springs that have like a 320, I think, 25-pound front spring rate, which is kind of right in the range. And spring rates, if you look at the base spring rate, and I'll talk about the SN90, the S197 is the best example because that's spring on shock. When you put the spring on the control arm, you have to use a motion ratio to calculate the spring rate versus the spring on the shock. But factory cars come in maybe anywhere from 130 to 160 pound springs in the front. Our street performance, well, the newer cars like the GT350s, I think they're up to 190 for the 350 and 240 for the R. I have a whole sheet on this. I'd have to look. So that's pretty much and on the aftermarket stuff, you're not going to get much about 225, and you have no control over ride height. That's why we use I use coilovers. But my spring philosophy starts. You start out with a 131, let's say 131.70 spring on your car. The best you can get in the aftermarket is around a 200, 225. My touring package is 350. Street performance is 400. Intermediate track on the street tires is in the 500, 550 range, depending on the driver. And then advanced track on sticky tires is 650. And you think that's a lot from a late Sun Paul in World Challenge on Pirelli slicks. We were running 850, 950, depending on the track. So it's the more spring you put into a Mustang, the better they turn, the quicker they get. Now, the downside of it is the more spring you put in, as you go up in spring rate, your window of opportunity for making a mistake shrinks with every level you go up on springs. So by the time you get up to 850-pound springs, you really can't make too many mistakes unless you get lightning quick reflexes or a trained racing driver. That's why we keep everybody in that 650 range. It seems to be just a great track setup. That's what I run in my car. So that's kind of how I look at spring rates. So, I mean, it's like everything under the car has to just flat work. That's the very first thing. And then you get down to brakes. I mean, if you go fast, you have to stop. Using a wall or a tree is kind of like, it's a very effective way to stop, but it's not really preferred. And what braking is all about, I mean, you're taking a Mustang, which is, let's say 3,800 pounds. You're 120 miles down the straightaway. That's 3,800 pounds of kinetic mass traveling at 120 miles an hour. That's a lot. So what the job of the brakes are really, in an effort to slow you down, they take kinetic energy and turn it into heat energy. And that's why brakes get so hot. I mean, they're taking all that kinetic energy and turning it into heat energy which means they're pulling energy out of the car and putting it into your brake rotors. So that's why it's so important to have a good set of brakes. Even if you've got stock brakes and doing track days, you need pads. You got to have better pads. You've got to have a pad that works within the heat range that the compound was designed for. Because street pads are typically good to, maybe, I'm guessing, I don't know this for sure, I'm guessing like 400 degrees, but they're also good down to minus 20. Street performance pads, you might get up in the 800 range. We have like, I think 20 different pad compounds to choose from when people call in. I'll pick a compound for them. But on my car, I've been running at 1200 degrees rotor temperature. And I've been using a brake, then I was using a brake that the compounding was good between 400 and 1600. So it's right in the middle. So I get the best brake wear and the best stopping power. And so we've got different heat ranges. We've got some that'll go from 100 up to 1000. That would be for novice drivers. And then we got one that goes up to 1200. That could be advanced novice, so to speak. And then they start going up from there. We've got one customer who's running 1800 degrees on his brakes. We've got pads that go to 2000. So brakes are really important. And then you've got to have, even if it's a stock caliber, you have to have good brake pads if you go on track. But I'm not good with stock brakes. So all of my cars, the brakes are updated or upgraded. I'll use S197 because that's what we're doing the most of right now. Although we still are featuring and providing parts and technical support for 99 to 04 Cobras, Mustang Cobras with the IRS. I think we're the only people that really are doing much with IRS, because I think, and I understand IRS. I mean, it's nothing new to me when it came out on my racing back in the 70s. So we use S197 because it's simple. But what I typically do is I'll put like a big brake kit on the front, and I've been using Bear for like 20 years. That's a great company, great product, and great people. So I'll do a brake upgrade. Typically, if it's just a street car, we use like the Pro Plus setup, which is, it's kind of like a street brake. It uses OE pads. So it's kind of a street brake. It's a great street brake package. It's not really a track package, although we had one customer that ran an entire season of HPD with those brakes, but we had good pads. That's the other trick. But I use the extreme of the 6 keys, the 6 piston on the front, and on the back. What I do is I upgrade from the standard rotor to a 14-inch rotor, still retain the factory caliper, and that increases the leverage, kind of like just getting a bigger breaker bar to improve the braking. And the reason I keep the standard caliper on the back is Mustangs have what's called a C-lock differential axle, which means the axles come in, you drop a little C-clip on, they pull back, and the pin for the diff comes in between them. Well, invariably, there's a little bit of play. Some cars, it's just very slight, and other cars, it's a lot. Well, if you put a big brake package on an 8.8 axle without doing something about that, the movement of the axle, what happens is you get pad knockback. You go around a couple of corners, and then you put your foot on the brake, and nothing's there. You got to pump the brakes up. So I don't use big brakes on the back unless we upgrade how they fit on the back, which is either adapting for 9-inch. The biggest thing is just adapt back in for 9-inch axles. And there's ends that we get from Strain, and they build the axle and just drop it in, and you're good. But you've got to do something about that. We've seen in one of the aftermarket companies, on their C-clip replacements, they send 2 different sizes. One's bigger than the other. On some cars that works great. Anyway, the point is you can't upgrade the brakes unless you have the sliding caliper in the back to work with the knock. But if you put a 14-inch rotor on the back, that's just about the same as putting a bigger caliper on the smaller rotor. So that's the brakes. And then it's depending on where we go from there. Certainly the transmission, the car's got to shift. I talked about earlier, I don't like fishing for gears. I don't like hitting the wrong gear. I need to feel a shift to make it positive. So we either put a shifter in, or in some cases just change the transmission. And then also I'll use a lot of aluminum drive shafts. You got to get rid of that mass. Mass is horsepower. It takes more horsepower to turn a lot of mass than to turn a little mass. So we go through the drivetrain at the back of the car. I'm thinking, okay, depending on the applications, everything I do is custom built. Pick a rear end ratio that's going to work. And typically it's going to be in that, for the newer cars with Coyotes, it's maybe 373 range. That seems to be a good ratio. And I always use torsions back there. We started using torsions on the IRS cars, or a torsion type differential. Using torsions on the IRS cars, and it worked so well, we just started adapting them to the later cars. And Ford, I think, even used them for their race cars. All came with torsions, and the newer cars on the when you get a Performance 1 package, you get the torsion in the back in 373 gears. So, I mean, the drivetrain has to go through, and as far as power, I mean, if you're building a driver's car, you don't need tons of power. But for the newer cars, it's just as simple as a good cold air kit, headers, and a free-flowing exhaust, and you can pick up quite a bit of power without cracking into the motor. We used to build in the late 90s. We built a whole bunch of supercharged Cobras, where I use a Vortec type centrifugal, and newer cars were using the I'll think of it. But anyway, I use centrifugal because on the positive displacement, like the Eaton that sits on top of the motor, that is good for instant torque. I mean, as soon as you put your foot down, bang, you got torque because the pressure's right there. In a Mustang, unless you're a drag racer, you really don't need instant torque. It's coming off the corner. I mean, for the most part, they're loose, and if they don't have my rear grip kit on it, they're really loose. And you got to wait to put your foot all the way down, otherwise you break traction in the back. But having a supercharger that has so much torque, you're going to break traction coming off the corner, slows you down. I mean, you might be really, really honking at the end of the straightaway, but you're not going to get off that corner. And the key to quick lap times is how quick you get off the corner. So with a centrifugal type, it's more like a turbo. It's a mechanical turbo, let's call it. And as RPM spools up, the pressure spools up. So rather than having a whole bunch of extra pressure when you're just coming off the corner, it's going to start feeding in pressure as you go faster and faster. And it's pretty transparent, and the car just hauls off. So that's why I use that type of supercharger. Now the positive displacement, like the one sitting motor, that's the one to use for trucks. Absolutely, there's no question about it. So anyway, that's the whole power thing. We've done a bunch of other different things, but then again, you have to, if you make more power, you got to cool it. So we helped the company develop a triple pass, triple flow aluminum radiator. We've got an SM95, 197, and 550 that work beautifully. So, I mean, the outside of the car comes last. Depending on the customer and what they want, we'll do some things the outside. If it's a really fast car, we'll add some aero to it. But I mean, it's all about the driving experience, all the things I need to put in there to make it work. Now, in the earlier cars, if I couldn't find in the market what I needed to make it work, we made it. That's where our parts program came from. The parts program flows out of the car program. And that's why you don't see tons of different control arms on our website. It's just the ones that I use. Our website is just the stuff that I use. So it's proven. We got the best technical support. But it came from car builds, not from a warehouse, okay? All right. I know some companies are a parts company that will pull off the shelf and build a car. And we're just the opposite. We build the car, and then we take the parts we had to create, even the parts we use, and put them on the shelf because I know they work, it's tested, and it gives us, I say, the best technical support of anybody in the aftermarket because what we sell is what we use. Do we have it? Did I get through the whole car? Oh, seating. If it's going to be a track car, you need to have better seats. If the car doesn't come with Recaros, you need to think about upgrading. Even before the seats, you need to get a good harness. And we do have some good harness belts that are just a 4-point that are pretty easy to use because you have to get your butt locked down. And that makes such a huge difference. And then if you're getting more serious, then you get a better seat. You have to remove the element of having to support yourself while you're driving with your seat. And anybody that when they start out, they know they're going around a corner, they got one knee up against one thing, going around another corner, another knee up against something else. You got to get rid of that. You got to be just 100% focused on driving, but let the seat and the belt just hold you in place. That way you become part of the car. And I mean, that's the key. That's what I'm always looking for when I build a car. I want to sit in that seat and I want to feel like I am part of the car and the car is part of me, because there's a connection. I mean, the car will talk to you. The car will tell you things that you need to know. if you just listen or know what to look for. So that's why it's important to get locked down in the seat. And then some cars will put like a roll bar in the back, 197, 550s. I mean, from there on out, it gets pretty, pretty customized depending on the customer, but chassis, suspension, wheels, tires, brakes, and it's got to drive. It's got to drive like it's got to drive. I mean, it has to be a great driving car.